The Bully Girl Magazine podcast is your dog-eared audio destination, bookmarking the most compelling tales and insights from the vast canine universe. While we passionately dive into the world of bully breeds, dispelling myths, offering training tips, and discussing breed standards, our scope isn't limited. We cast our net wide to encompass a diverse range of dog breeds, ensuring no tale is left untold. Enhanced by expert interviews and inspiring stories, this podcast is a beacon for responsible ownership and breed education. It's where bully breed enthusiasts meet the broader dog-loving community, fostering unity, understanding, and shared joy in every bark and wag. So whether you're out walking your dog or listening at home, be sure to enjoy the show and keep coming back. So glad you're listening and or watching the Bully Girl Magazine podcast. I love to read all about dogs, and I just read one book that is so incredible. It's so packed full of incredible information, and it's for all dog lovers. This book is The Purest Bond, Understanding the Human-Canine Connection by Jen Golbeck and Stacy Colino. Now, Jen Golbeck, is the internet's dog mom and creator of the social media sensation, The Golden Ratio. She and her husband rescue golden retrievers who are senior or who have special medical needs and give them a safe and comfortable life. This is gonna make me cry. Stacy Colino is an award-winning writer specializing in health and psychological issues. She is a co-author of numerous books, including Countdown, Emotional Inflammation, and Disease Proof. Stacy is a lifelong dog owner and lover and has owned 3 rescue dogs. Yes, I can read. Jen and Stacy, welcome to the Bully Girl Magazine podcast. So glad to have you.
Thank you. Thanks for having us.
It's so great to have you on. So I always start with the same 2 questions. So I'll start with you, Stacy. Does your dog do something quirky, funny, unusual that stands out to you that you could share with us?
Oh my gosh, yes. So she does a couple of things. She gets the Zoom. She's probably 8 or 9 years old. She's a rescue, so we don't know for sure. But she gets the zoomies multiple times a day, pounces on her toys. If she needs to go out during the day, she'll just walk up. She won't bark. She'll come up and paw me, which is just so cute. And my husband's like, go away. He doesn't read it, right? But I do. I know what she's telling me. I'm like, she has to go out. No, she doesn't. She does actually. But that's her thing. She just comes up in one paw.
So cute.
And she is such a smiler. So she's a chocolate lab shepherd mix. So she's a real reddish brown. I'd invite her in, except she's noisy.
Oh.
And she's reddish brown, sort of fox colored. She's beautiful. She smiles so much that she has developed smile lines on her face. And you can see them all the time, whether she's smiling or not. So
I love that. I wish we'd embrace ours. And how about for you, Jen?
I mean, we have 5 dogs, so I will not give you one for each of them because that'll take up the whole podcast. But I will say one of our dogs is named Guacamole. He's very much in love with Stacy. They have met and formed a special bond.
love.
But he's a rescue, and when I picked him up, he was probably around 3 years old. He was just dropped at a shelter. And when he came to our house, we always like to have, stuffies. And we get these the sharks from IKEA. They're called Blauhai is the IKEA name. And, they're like 4 feet long. And we had one. And so I gave it to him. And the first day he was here, he put his mouth on the shark and put one paw over the tail. And he had the shark in his mouth the entire first week, except when he was eating. And I think that became his thing. So now we always have 10 sharks at a time because they will get ripped up sometimes in excited play. But he has to have that shark all the time. He sleeps with it in our bed. So it's me and my husband, Guacamole, the 90-pound dog, and a 4-foot IKEA Blauhai. But absolutely sleeps with it in his mouth. He carries it everywhere. We live in the Florida Keys. He brings it into the ocean, and then, it has to go in the wash, and we bring out a reserve shark. But he's really, really committed to those sharks, and it's just adorable. And last year for his birthday, we bought him 10 and put them all out at once on the couch. And so he was just surrounded by this pile of IKEA sharks, which was amazing.
Do you have a
What did
video
he
of that on
do?
your popular social media? Because I need to see that.
He was so happy. We do have a video and a bunch of pictures, and he just picked one and then laid down in the middle of the pile. And so there's a great picture with him with the shark in his mouth and then just all these other sharks surrounding him.
I absolutely love that. All right, back to you, Stacy, and the same question afterward for Jen. When did your love of dogs begin?
I was a kid. I would say probably 4 or 5. I grew up in a family that always had a dog. And we had a pretty dramatic move. We lived in Geneva, Switzerland from the time I was 4 to 6. And then we moved back when I was 6 to a new area in DC. And I didn't know anybody. And I was kind of lonely for the first couple of years. And we had this poodle named Roscoe, who was not coiffed like a poodle. He
Right.
looked more like a sheepdog. And he was super, super smart. So you probably read this story in the book. At one point, all of my friends in the neighborhood had after school activities and I didn't.
Yeah.
And so I decided I was going to teach Roscoe tricks. And I played
Yeah.
ball with him in the back all the time. But I taught him how to jump through a hula hoop because I'd gotten one for my birthday and I was a klutz at using it. But I got Roscoe to jump through the hoop 2 feet off the ground. And I think I just fell in love with him after that because it solidified our bond. He had been my mom's dog until then. And after that, he started like just coming and lying on the floor in my room when I was reading. I took care of him and brushed him. Nobody else did. And just fell in love. And that was it. I have had dogs my entire life since then.
Oh, that's wonderful. And Jen?
I was born to an older sister, Goldie, who was a golden retriever 1 year older than me, and so we were just inseparable. Like I have these baby pictures of me before I could walk, sitting next to her, and I used to sleep on her. I used to try to ride her. She was a saint for putting up with me. She did give me a little chomp once, which I absolutely deserved. But yeah, I had the kind of a tough time growing up, and the dogs, like Goldie lived to be 10, and then we got another one after her. Like they were really a kind of safe haven and safe relationship for me, and so they've always just been this critical part of my life. And the only time I didn't have one was when I was an undergrad, and actually got my first puppy. Like I smuggled her into the dorm for 2 weeks before I graduated because I was like, finishing college, need a puppy. But yeah, I was born into loving golden retrievers, especially.
Well, I really loved reading the book, what a positive effect the human-canine connection can have on our physical, emotional, cognitive, and social health and well-being. And, Jen, you talk about your dog Major and how this connection was so clear when you were in eighth grade. Can you tell us about this?
Yeah, so I had a variety of more than the normal difficulties growing up. And so by the time like middle school is terrible for
Oh,
everybody.
it's horrible.
And I was a very, very depressed, like 12 and 13-year-old, which like may have happened anyway, but like trying to kind of process like other bad stuff that had happened, it was a tough time. And I was like not actively suicidal and like doing anything, but I thought about it a lot. And I didn't talk to my parents about it, but I was like 13-year-old girl. It was impossible to not notice that like I was really depressed and withdrawn. And we had one dog, and we'd never had two dogs, but my parents went out and got Major, this golden retriever puppy, who I have always called my suicide prevention dog, because I think they were sort of like, it was like the 90s, right? Like you weren't really doing therapy the same way then. I mean, I have a great therapist now and everybody should have a therapist, but
Absolutely.
it was not really an option, at least in like my universe. But they knew that they had to do something, and they're like, maybe a dog. And it was like exactly the right thing, because I felt, I was kind of bullied in school. I mean, I was definitely bullied in school, which was one of the problems. And, I think I also had like standard run of the mill awkwardness. And, for women especially, just like everything about your body is wrong at that point, and
Yeah.
all the issues that go with that. And he was just this like completely safe place for me. He wasn't going to make fun of me, where I was self-conscious about everything, the way I sat and the way I walked and every single thing. And I could just be with him, and there was no judgment. And I felt like it was sort of the only place in my life that there was no judgment. And so I looked forward to getting home. And when I even went to college, I remember like the icebreakers, when you're a freshman, and it was like, so who's your best friend back at home? And I was like, it's my dog. And like, people are gonna think this is a dumb answer, but it's true. Like I had plenty of human friends, but he gave me so much like safety and stability in a space of non-judgment that was so necessary for my mental health at the time. So
Yeah.
he's got a special place in my extensive dog history. He got me through that.
I'm so glad you had him. That is so important.
Yeah.
Now, I do go through chapter by chapter. Now, there's so much in the book, I'm not giving it all away, but there's definitely things that I wanted to touch on. So, in chapter one, The Birth of a Bond, you talk about how having great but realistic expectations when bringing a dog into the family is super important. So, Stacy, what are some of the key things to keep in mind when you first bring a dog home?
A really important point is to be willing to give the dog the space that they need to adjust. Whether it's a puppy or an older dog that you've rescued or adopted, you have to remember that this dog has been removed from everything that was familiar and
Yeah.
is suddenly plunked into an unfamiliar environment, a foreign environment with new people, and it can be overwhelming. And sometimes dogs aren't their best selves in that situation early on. So, especially when you have young kids, you really have to tell people tread lightly, give the dog space. It's so funny because with Sadie, the dog that I was talking about before, our current dog, when we brought her home 3+ years ago, I said to my kids they were like older teenagers at the time, don't hug the new dog. Don't hug the new dog. That we just kept saying that. And she is the cuddliest creature in the entire world. So they tease me relentlessly. Remember you said don't hug the new dog? She wants to be all over us. But she needed that space early on. It had to be her initiative. And I think that that's really important to remember.
Yeah, I think so too. Jen, I'd love for you to talk about the rule of three when it comes to rescue dogs.
Yeah, when you bring a new rescue dog in, like Stacy said, it's such a disruptive time for them. And dogs really thrive on schedules. And so, like, everything is disrupted. They've left, even if it was a bad place, the place they've always been. And so, we like to say 3 days, 3 weeks, and 3 months are kind of the markers where when you first bring them in, you have no idea what that dog is actually going to be like in those first 3 days. They will probably have accidents in the house, even if they're perfectly housebroken.
Yeah.
They may be withdrawn. They may be super needy. Like, it's just not their normal selves. Like, I think any of us would be if we were suddenly like yanked out of our house, didn't know what was going on, and then like dropped off in some weird place. So you just got to like give them everything they need in as much space as they need for those first 3 days, and be really patient and forgiving and gentle. And then they'll start to settle in a little bit as you get a routine established and they understand that this is the place they are. But they will still be kind of on edge in ways that you might not even recognize for those first 3 weeks. And eventually you'll look back and be like, oh, wow, like that's, definitely not how they normally are. They were pretty stressed out. But they need those, 2 or 3 weeks to really get established in their routine, to figure out who you are. And then you see them kind of become more of your dog. So after about 3 months, then you really see them as they're going to likely be with you. Like they're in their final like personality. They found their place in the home. But it's quite a long process if you're thinking you're going to get a dog and then suddenly have dog life. It's a quarter of a year that you spend just getting them adapted to life in your house.
Wow. Well, the first dog I ever got, I was 33. My husband and I got together, and his name was Bailey. He was a pit mix. And I didn't know anything about crating. He was only 6 months old. So we went to Boston for the day. When we came home, there was a pile, every book had been chewed up. I had this special cassette tape, not cassette tapes, but that my beloved grandfather Saul, who had passed away in 96, excuse me, had made about his life. I was so upset. And then we're like, oh yeah, I guess we should crate him, Or I was like, what is that? So I think really understanding what a young dog needs, or maybe even an older dog, and do a little research. Like we just went to the shelter and just picked him up. That was just we didn't do anything because I'd wanted a dog my whole life. I couldn't wait any longer. I didn't care. I just wanted him. So I think doing your homework's important.
Yeah, for sure. You learn those lessons, and we've probably had 40 dogs come through between fosters and dogs that we've adopted, and we're still learning stuff like, oh, that's a thing. Okay, like now we know how to deal with that for the next time. And man, my dog Venkman, who actually we got as a puppy, ate a pair of my Jimmy Choos that I had bought. Like I got a bonus from my regular job after like the whole financial crisis, because our wages had been frozen for years and years. I worked for the state of Maryland as a professor, and I was like, okay, I have $750. Like, what am I going to do with it? I'm going to buy myself a pair of Jimmy Choos. And I still have them because I can't throw them away, even though the heel is like totally chewed off. And I was like, okay, no fancy shoes on the floor, which I should have known, but
Yeah.
we keep learning these lessons.
I want to jump into chapter 2, Everyone's Best Friend, Finding Companionship and Unconditional Love. You talk about the research of Sabrina Carl, and she basically showed that when our dogs see us, their brains light up the way little kids see their parent, like when they see their parents. And you have so much incredible research in the book. I was blown away. What was it like gathering all that, Stacy?
Oh, it was fun. I mean, we were having our minds blown on a weekly basis. We would research one area and stumble upon a really quirky study that found something like you just mentioned,
Yeah.
and we would share it and we would discuss it and write about it. And it was just a joy because it's such a happy subject. And so to learn all these nuances and subtleties about this bond and about dog psychology and dog behavior and attachment was just fascinating.
Yeah, it really is. And I really enjoyed reading about the roots of attachment. Another person that you interviewed was a woman named Ardra Cole, and
Mhm.
she wanted to understand the meaning and significance of people's relationships to their pets. And observed, excuse me, a set of themes through her research: beloved attachment, unconditional love, steadfast friendship, and joyful responsibility. And it sounds like, I mean, most dog owners I talk to, it seems like we have all of those things. Would you say that's true, Jen, or does it depend on like how much time you spend with your dog, or the relationship with your dog?
I love that study so much. Like I remember like finding that with those different themes and being like, Stacy, like
Yeah.
look at these themes. We've got to put them. And I think that's one of the few sections of the book where like we literally like took it out of the paper and put it in the book like as it was, because I think like they're beautifully named. They really capture these relationships. And I think you're right. I think we all have that. And those were distilled from conversations with a lot of people about what are the most important aspects of this. And so I think, for some of us, it's going to be different things, and for us taking in, special needs rescue dogs, like that last theme of like responsibility and like loving your dog through responsibility and care for them is like such an important part of the way that we do it. But all the other ones apply too, right?
Yeah.
And depending on the dog and depending on the time in the dog's life, we talk a lot in the book, and we've got a couple chapters that I'm sure we'll get to about like end of life issues. I think
Yes.
for anyone who's seen a dog through the aging process, like at the end, you're hand feeding them. Like
Mhm.
I've hand fed like spaghetti out of a bowl to
Oh,
dogs, and it doesn't bother me. It doesn't seem like a chore. It's like sad that they're at that state, but it's like how great that I can do this thing and love them and take care of them, right? Like it's an honor
yeah.
and it's such a beautiful part of the relationship. And so I think that's we over the course of our relationship with our dogs will experience all of those in different degrees.
Yeah, definitely. I had to do that recently with my lab, Benji, who's 9.5 and has really bad arthritis. Oh, he was the one barking. He still has like that puppy spirit. I had to hand feed him one day because he wasn't feeling well. And it was actually sweet because usually if you give him a treat, he literally is like a flippin' alligator. He tries to eat your hand. Whereas my pit bull Blue, with all the stereotypes, he just knows. He's very gentle. He just like takes a little nibble. And he was like, I'm like, oh my God, he's being so gentle. But then I thought, oh my God, he must really not feel well because this isn't him.
Yeah.
Right. So
But
on the
you do
one
it.
hand, it was nice to have him be gentle. On the other hand, I was like, oh crap, there's something going on.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that was difficult. Now, in chapter 3, Family Matters, how dogs can help us connect with loved ones, you talk about what we talked about earlier with kids who have their dogs as their best friend. I needed a dog growing up. My mother was chronically ill. My father was super busy with his work, and then he was an actor on the side, and then he was president of the school board on the side, and then he was a marathon runner on the side, and it was just it was a mess. And I was really shy and awkward, and I was bullied. And I just think, damn it, my mom was afraid, so she wouldn't get one. But you've got to look beyond your own self as a parent and look at what your kids need. But that's a whole other show. So I'm just so glad, Jen, that you had major. But it really makes it interesting, or a big difference. What is interesting, which is why I said interesting, is I love this about when people talk to their dogs directly. You write, their speech often has a high pitched, sing songy quality about it, a bit like baby talk, and it might be beneficial. So, Stacy, tell us about the research on this.
Well, Jen will remember the
Or,
details of this research a little bit more
oh,
than I will.
sure.
And there was a more recent study that came out on this.
Oh,
But they do respond to the cadence of your voice and sort of the melody and the lyricism of it. And I'm convinced that's why Guacamole likes me, because he just likes my voice. But a lot of times I found that with my dogs. They will just be lying there half asleep. And if I come over and start talking to them, they won't move their bodies, but they'll start thumping.
yes.
And they are clearly responding to the sound of my voice. And there must be just something that's very comforting to them about certain pitches or cadences.
Yeah, it was fun because my husband does that a lot. I do that, of course, my daughter does with the dogs. Or my daughter will say, see, she loves it. Or Benji loves when I call him, whatever it is. And I'm thinking, that's really just a pitch. I don't want to bum her out. Now, in chapter 4, Social Creatures, How Dogs Can Improve Our Lives in the Community, you talk about them being social facilitators. So I moved here 23 years ago to the East Coast and the West Coast. I didn't have a single friend. In New England, it's really hard to meet people. They're very family oriented, I found, not to generalize, but that's been my experience. And it's really hard to break in. And I got Bailey, the dog that I mentioned, the one who chewed everything up, but we got a crate and he ended up, it was fine. Just by taking him to the woods. There's a lot of woods where I live, and that's how I made my friends. If it wasn't for Bailey, I literally wouldn't have had any friends the first several years living here because nobody just comes up and talks to you. But if you have a dog and they have a dog, there you go. And you talk about the pet factor, which was a term by Lisa Wood, PhD, and her colleagues. Jen, if you want to speak to this a little bit.
Yeah, I mean this was some of the most interesting work for me because I've also had that experience, and
Yeah,
I think now on like the population of adult friends, right, that I've made as an adult, and I
yeah,
think there's one couple that I met outside dog stuff and everything else is dog people, and like that's how I met them. So I think we all know that that's true, whether it's just like meeting the people out it walking in your neighborhood or like really forming deep friendships. But
Mhm.
one of the really interesting results that we talk about in this chapter, that's like one of my favorite ones that we found, is that as a dog owner, that you get to know people in your neighborhood if you're out walking your dog, even if you don't
Mhm.
know their names. And I never do. I know the dog's names, but not the
Exactly.
humans' names. But they've done research that shows within a community, the sense of civic responsibility, the community cohesiveness, even the crime rates in the community are connected to the number of dogs in that community. And it works even for people who don't have dogs. So if you live in a neighborhood where there's just like a lot of dog owners, that neighborhood is going to be generally happier, closer knit, like taking care of each other more. And I think it's exactly because of this pet factor that you kind of
Yeah.
get used to seeing everybody out there. Even if you don't talk to me, I'm like that girl walking the dogs past your house like every day. You sort of know who I am. I clean up after them, so you like me because they're not,
Yes.
and and you have a little more casual encounters. My dog will like run up and say hi to you at your fence. So I thought that was really interesting that it's not just us as dog owners getting those connections, but the whole community, even people who don't have dogs, benefit if you've got a lot of them around, which is pretty beautiful, right?
Oh, yeah, it really is. And yeah, I do notice that like people, they see me walking around. Some people say hi. Some people, I still have to educate them around pit bulls and what sweethearts they are. And, luckily a lot of people are willing to listen. And, and then Blue, I mean, he's just magic. I mean, he just will lick you and love you and just rub up against you. And, they're like, oh, he's very friendly. Oh, I told you. Chapter 5 is part of part 2. We're moving into enhancing our health, getting out and about, how dogs encourage us to go outside and move. Living in New England where it's cold 9 months out of the year, I would not be outside when it's 22 degrees to walk my dogs. Now, of course, when it's that cold, I'll, their little shoes on or their little boots and I'll, put a little coat on them and I'll be all bundled up. But that's getting me out year round. And it's
Right.
so important for our health.
Yeah, I'm a runner and I don't like running in the cold. And
Yeah.
when we're in Florida, that doesn't matter. But when I'm up here in Maryland, especially those days where it's like 50 degrees and like rainy, and I'm like, man, like the last thing I want to do right now. Like I know I need to go for a run, and I will enjoy doing the run eventually, but I can't. It'll be like an hour, and I'm sitting on the couch like checking email in my running clothes to not go out. If I'm like, all right, I got to make this happen. Hopper, who we recently lost, but she was like my
Oh,
running pal for like most of her life. I'd be like, I'm just going to pick up the leash. And then Hopper would come running over and she'd sit down. She'd look at me with like her big brown eyes. And then you can't
oh,
say no. And
right.
we'd go out and, she'd go swim in the creek and come out with
Oh,
icicles on her fur, just like the happiest dog. And like, I can't deny her that. So yeah, like not just to like get them out for their walks, but like they can really spur what we call that behavioral activation in us, the thing to like get us out and do the thing.
yeah. And in the book, too, there was another researcher, Kate Campbell, and her colleagues at the University of Otago in New Zealand, and they explored the effects of dog walking on adult dog owners. And they identified 3 common themes: emotional connection, healthy interactions, and psychological well being. So, as someone, I have a master's in public health. I did health media well, I still am, but for 25 years. And I always say to people, if you're not getting out enough and you can afford it, you have the time for it, you're going to take good care of it, get a dog. It's going
Mhm.
to get you outside.
Yeah. And you can even learn to like being outside
Yeah,
when it's cold if you have a dog. So I
right.
love seeing snow out the window.
Yeah,
I don't like going out into the snow,
right.
but I have actually learned to love it because Sadie and our previous dog, Inky, loved to frolic in the snow. And it's just the cutest thing to watch. And so it changes the whole quality of being out in the snow.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Yeah, I love going out in the snow. Now, Blue hates the rain. Benji could care less. It'll be pouring rain. He's out there sniffing around, taking his time to do his business. Blue will wake me up at 5, go to the door, see it's raining. He won't go out, and he won't go out until it stops, or until it's a little bit lighter. Are your dogs like that with the rain?
We have Venkman, who's now 9, but I've had since a puppy, and she
Oh,
will not walk on the grass in the rain. And so at some point, like we ended up putting like a little strip of mulch next to our patio, so she would just go pee because she
yeah,
absolutely like she'd be like, "Oh no, my like dainty little feet, I can't put them on the grass in the rain." But they're golden retrievers, right? So I think Benji, right, is a
yeah.
lab, and so they
He's
just
a lab.
love being wet, right?
Yes.
So they're
Hmm.
they're happy to be out there in the rain, but she's got real dainty paws and doesn't like it.
Yeah, lately we have a paver deck and around what's called a radiant pool, which is really cool, by the way. It's part in ground, part above ground, and it's salt water, by the way. But anyway, we have this paver deck that wraps around part of it. And lately, Blue is like pooping on the paver deck. I'm like, what are you doing? There's grass like 2 steps from you. But yeah, maybe it's like, I don't want to get my delicate pitty feet wet.
I
It's
I
like,
have dealt with so many
dude.
of those incidents, Lisa, so many.
Come on. Now, chapter 6, Strong Always, How Dogs Can Support Our Physical Well-Being. It talks about some of the same things. And I like that you get into the microbiome. Stacy, if you can talk to us about that, because I've covered that on my health shows for years, but not when it comes to dogs.
Yeah, I thought that was super interesting. So,
Yeah.
we all have a microbiome, a community of bacteria and other microbes inside us. Our dogs have their own as well. And when you share life with other people and other dogs, you're kind of swapping microbes
Yeah.
and exposing each other to yours.
Yeah.
And research has found that living with a dog actually enhances the human microbiome in people and in ways that could benefit gut health, psychological health, prevent the development of allergies when kids are exposed
Yeah.
from a young age, and so on. And it's really fascinating because one of the reasons people don't get a dog is they're worried about like the dirt and the fur and the mess.
Yeah.
And actually, some of that is beneficial.
Exactly. Yeah, that was my mom's main. She said, "Oh, I'm afraid," but her main thing was, "It's going to be too messy." I have to say she's right, especially if you have a lab. I mean, the amount of fur this dog loses, I'll literally vacuum. Benji won't even shake. He will walk through, and I'll be like, "What the heck? Didn't I just?" I
I
can't
was
even
lucky.
imagine, Jen, how it is with Goldens. You must be
I
drowning in dog hair.
It's funny. My husband, like one of the ways he calms himself is by vacuuming laundry and dishes. So like I really hit the jackpot.
Yes, you
Uh,
did.
but we had all the dogs up here in Maryland for a month. Like about a week ago, we brought them back down to Florida, and I told my husband, I was like, "Listen, I'm going to have the cleaners come in. You don't have to vacuum on the last day because we were packing up." And I forgot to call the cleaners last week, so I'm back up here, and so we have 1 day's worth of fur, and it's like almost as thick as the carpet. I feel like I'm like, no one can come to my house until I vacuum. There's so much. But it's the same thing. Like we can vacuum, and by the time we get out of the bedroom and back to the room we started in, it looks like we need to do it again. There's a lot of fur. And at some
Yeah,
point, I was never super fussy about that, but I was just
sure.
like, this is part of the cost of having these dogs, and I can embrace this as a joyful part of my life. And so it's like glitter, golden retriever glitter all over the
Oh,
Oh,
house.
I need to think that way. For some reason, it bothers me. And I'm not a neat freak, but there's something about when I look at the floor and it's just dog hair covered, it drives me bananas. So I'm going to start thinking of it as lab glitter because blue
There you
doesn't
go.
shed. So it's all
that's
Benji.
lovely.
Now, in chapter 7, to serve and protect, you talk about how dogs can detect diseases and danger. I really thought it was interesting when you talk about medical alert dogs, and also I like you're very clever with words, detecting a whiff of disease. Jen, tell us a little bit about this.
We opened this chapter with a story about a dog named Chomp, which is like
Yeah,
one of my favorite dog names in the book. And
yeah, me
it's
too.
this story is really funny because when we were working on the book, we in Florida, we were having a dock put in at our house because we're right on the open water.
Oh, nice.
And the guy, fascinating guy who was like in charge of who owns the company that built the dock, and he loves dogs. So every time he'd come to check on it, I'd bring a couple dogs out and he'd pet on them. And I was telling him one day we were working on this chapter, and I was like, "Yeah, John, we're writing this thing about how dogs detect disease." And he's like, "Oh yeah, my dog found out I was having a heart attack, and I'd be dead if it weren't for Chomp." And like goes on to tell me, and I hope he doesn't listen. Absolutely started crying a little bit. He's a very tough man who probably wouldn't admit that. This story of Chomp, who was sort of jumping on his chest, that he called it doggy CPR in the middle of the night. And he was so worried, it was so out of character, that he went to a cardiologist, and they ended up airlifting him out of the Keys, out of Key West up to Miami, and had surgery. Which saved his life. He absolutely, would have been dead in a few days. And this wasn't a dog trained for anything. It was just a dog who's like, he could smell it, he could sense it, there was something wrong, and it saved his life. And we got a lot of stories that people shared of dogs who weren't even trained finding things like diseases or diabetes, low blood sugar. And then Stacy did a lot of the really interesting research, for example, into seizure alert dogs, like dogs who are actually trained to detect that. It's just a fascinating space of work.
It really is. Now, in chapter 8, supporting mental health, how dogs can help with psychiatric issues. I saw my husband the other day. Every single person in my life has some sort of mental health issue, which I'm not, it's very common to have different, maybe you have anxiety disorder, or maybe you have unfortunately PTSD or panic disorder. I mean, there's a lot going on in the world. There's a lot of stuff. I think that this is a whole nother topic, but I think that we're born with that gets exacerbated through trauma. And the research is really showing, you talk about in the book, that dogs really help people with clinical depression, anxiety, PTSD, acute distress from trauma, facilitate recovery from addiction or eating disorders, and more. Stacey, if you can speak to this.
Sure. There's so many different mechanisms through which this happens. I mean, part of it is just sort of an instinctive sense of comfort that people get from being with dogs, but there's
Mhm.
also a whole body of research that looks at what happens when people, whether they have a psychiatric condition or not, spend time with a dog that they're comfortable with. Their blood pressure goes down, their stress hormones go down, their anxiety goes down, everything kind of calms. And that makes everything better for people who do have depression, anxiety. There was even some research that we included in the book about schizophrenia
Oh,
and
yeah.
people waiting for treatment in the hospital, like electroshock therapy. When they got to spend time with a therapy dog first, they went into it in a better state, a more stable state emotionally than if they didn't. And so it's a really, really profound effect.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Now, we're moving into part 3, and it talks about dogs supporting us emotionally. In chapter 9, they are all emotional support animals. Jen, you talk about how you really count on your dogs on a regular basis when you're feeling down or overwhelmed or stressed by the state of the world. Talk to us about this.
Yeah, I sometimes say that like the amount of stress in my life may be covertly revealed by the number of dogs that I have to kind of help me deal with it. Um, but it is inevitable, like whether you want it or not. If you lay
Mhm.
down in the floor in my house, in addition to getting some of that golden glitter on you, you also get the full dogs on you.
Oh,
I think Stacy has done this, right? You've done this laid on the floor in my house before with all the dogs here. So you lay down and the dogs just come over and they're like licking you on the face, and somebody's gonna like try to tunnel under your leg. They'll lay down on top of you. And we have 5, right? So it's like a lot of dog all
right.
right there. But you cannot be sad at the end of that. So if you're just like having a bad moment, right? I mean, Stacy,
Yeah.
did it work?
You end up giggling. You cannot help it. It's so sweet and fun. You end up giggling underneath all these golden retrievers.
I love how you wrote as like a cloud of golden retrievers.
That's it's pretty accurate. And so it's absolutely a thing I'll do if I get out of like a tough meeting or I'm just like, oh my God, I have so much to do. Like I'm just gonna take like 2 minutes and lay down on the floor and dogs come over and they're all excited. I'm like, okay, like I'm better now.
Yeah.
And just having like that little thing, right? Like people can make us feel better. But it sometimes takes a little more time. And there's always a little with every person we know, right? There's a little complication of
Of
like, well, they
course.
were mean to me that one time, or like maybe they're just not in the mood today.
Yeah.
Right. But like dogs don't come with those complications we have with people, and so it's a way that they can really like lift our spirits and help us relax. That's just like makes them happy to do it, and it's so accessible to us. It's one of the like day-to-day joys of living with these creatures.
Oh, it really is. If I don't get my daily blue cuddles, forget about it. I'm just not the same.
I wanted to jump in with a point too. This was one of my favorite
Sure.
findings from the book, that when you spend time with a dog that you love and you either pet it or you just look into the dog's eyes and the dog looks into yours, you both get this surge of oxytocin, which is a really calming hormone. It's often called the cuddle hormone or the love hormone because it's released when like mothers cuddle their babies, or even if you cuddle with your romantic partner.
Yeah.
And it's so strong for
Yeah.
both the people and the dogs, and that does just calm everything.
Yeah. I try to do that with both dogs every day. Just look into their eyes because I know it's increasing my oxytocin, it's increasing their
Yep.
oxytocin. It's so good. Now, the next few chapters, I'm just going to go over quickly because we don't have a lot of time, but the book is so good. But chapter 10, Star Teachers, How Dogs Help Children Learn and Grow. Chapter 11, reinforces how dogs serve as stabilizing influences in our lives, which is so true. I really want to get to part 4,
Hmm.
appreciating a well-lived life together, maturing together. I'm living with an aging dog, as I mentioned. Benji's, limping and it's really frustrating. And we did aquatic therapy with him, which was helpful. And I love how you talk about when your dog gets older, that maybe you're not able to do the same things, but you can still bond. So Jen, if you can talk to us about that.
Yeah, especially for us, because we take in dogs that are often like sick when they come to us.
Yeah.
But having had some puppies too. So Hopper, who I mentioned before, like I called her my number one running pal. We would run together all the time. And when she started developing arthritis, she couldn't really run. And so it's this thing that was like the thing that we did together almost every day. And you can be like, wow, I'm so sad that we can't do that anymore. But you can also just be like, now we're going to do different things. So we would do walks, and some of the dogs who loved walks, eventually they can't do those. And we had a dog, Maggie, and she developed a condition where she could walk like 2 houses and then her legs would give out. So I bought her a cart, like a gorilla garden cart, and we called it the Maggie Waggy, which I'm still like embarrassed at that cringy name,
Oh, it's
but it
wonderful. I
absolutely
loved reading
stuck.
about that.
We put like little lights on it and a dog bed in it. And I would take her on our walking route in the cart. So she would get out, and we could take her out and like let her sniff around. But it's a way that like, sure, like it's different. And wouldn't it be great if we were still able to have them in their prime all the time? But I felt like making that wagon for her and taking her out really allowed us to bond in a new way and find this new thing that we did together. And so you can still have like these joyful times, even though they're a little bittersweet, because it does kind of show you part of what you're losing as they get older too.
Yeah, that's true. I do want to mention the chapters that I didn't have time to dig into are still as fabulous as all the rest. I just wanted to have a little extra time to talk about chapter 13, The Broken Bond, Coping with Grief and Sorrow. I've mentioned this before. I have so much anticipatory grief. I'll be sitting with Blue and he'll just be like right on my chest with this heavy head, and I'll just start crying. My husband's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Oh, Blue's not going to be here someday." Because we got to enjoy him while he's here. I said, "Yeah, well, I've talked to enough experts to realize that anticipatory grief is real." You talk about something called disenfranchised, if I can say that word, grief. If you want to talk to us about that, Jen.
Yeah. I actually took a class on grief when we started, like a master's class, when we started writing this book. Because this chapter, as we had the whole thing mapped out, this chapter on like losing and grieving your dog, I was like, for me, this is the most important chapter in the book because it's a part of everybody's experience with a dog. And there's not a ton of resources out there. And it introduced me to this concept of disenfranchised grief, which is like a formal concept for psychologists who study this. And it happens when you lose someone, including a dog, where society doesn't really give you permission to mourn them. And so we see it in people like, we saw it in the AIDS crisis, right? Somebody dies of AIDS, and then, there was stigma around it. Or if someone dies of suicide, if you have a kid who's a school shooter, right, and they die, like you still have to grieve that, but society doesn't give you the space to grieve it like they would if there's stigma around it. And we kind of see, we absolutely see disenfranchised grief in dog owners. There's a lot of research on this because people who don't understand are like, but it's just your dog. Like, it was just a dog. Why are you so upset about it? And what the research shows is that people mourn their dogs 6 months to a year is the length of the average grieving process. For most people, they mourn them more than the humans in their life, even their very close human relationships. It's a profoundly deep connection. It's one of the most important connections we have in our life. And yet there are no societal rituals. Like, you don't have a funeral, you don't sit Shiva for your dog. If you do, people think you're weird. You can't.
Will. I'm Jewish.
Yeah, for sure. You go to work, like if your sister died, you could take a week off work, but you can't take a week off work because your dog died, because you don't have that support. And so that leaves us feeling really isolated from the support that we need, not just from immediate people, but also from society for this deep loss. And it makes the grieving process a lot harder.
It magnifies the grief, actually, because you don't have that support or that acknowledgement of what you're feeling.
Right.
And so you just end up feeling so much worse.
Well, it's interesting because my mom died when I was in my 20s. And there was this guy that I knew. I didn't know him well. I knew him from the gym. And he saw me like a month after my mom died, and I was really bummed out. He's like, "What's wrong?" I was like, "Well, my mom died last month." He's like, "Yeah, you're not over that yet?" I want to punch him in the face. So
you should have punched him in the face.
What bums me out is I like what you said about stigma, but in my own experience, it just was like people don't care, or people don't know how to deal with it, or people don't want to hear about it, or people have their own loss and they want to brush it under the rug. And if they have to listen to yours, maybe it'll bring up theirs. I just think our society as a whole is absolutely horrible at dealing with any kind of grief. And then especially when it comes to the grief of a dog. But this was my mother, for God's sake. And I thought, wow, the sad thing is I don't think his response is uncommon. So I think it's even worse for our dogs. Stacy, I was so heartbroken to read about Inky and that it was so fast. If you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah. So he was coming up on 14. And at the time, my husband and I would take him to the vet sometimes, actually before he was almost 14, and say, well, what's the life expectancy of this dog? Because he was an Akita mix. And the vet said, well, you're living on borrowed time. You've exceeded it already at age 12. Like Akitas just don't usually live this long. So he had a very full life. And when he was 12, he was found to have a tumor on his liver. and had very discreet borders. And so we had surgery to have it removed. They got clear margins. He got another year and a half, a little more than a year and a half of great life after that. And then all of a sudden, one night, he just collapsed and he was really weak. And I couldn't figure out what was wrong with him. I knew he had some arthritis in his back legs. So I thought, okay, well, maybe this is like a real flare up of arthritis. Let's take him. It was midnight. Let's take him to the emergency dog hospital, and maybe they can give him a shot of something. And this was during the pandemic. So we had to wait out in front in the car for the doctor to examine him. And we got a call back and said, he has frank blood throughout his abdomen. He has a cancerous tumor that is bleeding. He's basically bleeding to death internally. You need, frankly, they said, humane euthanasia would be the way to go. And it's like 2 a.m. at this point, and I'm like, I'm not ready for this. I did not come here expecting anything like this. And I said, can you make him comfortable overnight? And there was one other test they could do to see if there was anything they could do to save him, but they couldn't do it until the next morning. So I said, well, can you keep him overnight, keep him comfortable, do the test, and then call me back? And they did the test, and there was like, there's nothing we can do. So I said, well, in that case, can I come pick him up? I want him to come home to die. So we brought him home, and we found a vet that made house calls, and he passed away in our dining room with our whole family there. My older son and his girlfriend were in New York, so they were with us on FaceTime, and we just talked to Inky and sang to him. And it was just so heartbreaking, but it was, as they say, a good death for him.
Yeah. It's
passing.
It's interesting because Bailey, the dog I mentioned, my first dog, he was 13. He was running through the woods. Everything was fine. And then one night he collapsed. And then 2 days later, we had to put him down. We're like, what the hell? There was no warning. Everything was shutting down. He didn't even, he never even, no signs of anything.
Right.
And then our second dog that we had along with Bailey the majority of his life was a beautiful German Shepherd Irish Setter mix Bobo. He lived to 15.
Wow.
So we got to see what it's like to have the dog get older and older and not be able, use the legs and and both are horrible. But the shock of Bailey, just like the shock with Inky, was horrific.
Yeah.
Because I'm like, I just had my dog 2 days ago. We were literally running in the woods. I don't understand what happened.
Yeah. Yeah. It was just so devastating. And at one point, my kids were saying, well, are you going to have another dog? I'm like, I can't even think about that. Down the road, of course, but not right now. And my teenage son came to me one day and he said, Mom, I really think you should think about getting another dog sooner. I'm concerned about your mental health. You don't know how to live without a dog. And
I was touched when I read that in the book. How did you feel about that?
I thought he's right.
Yeah.
I don't know how to live without a dog. So at the time I started like the equivalent of window shopping for a dog, looking on all these adoption websites and rescue organization websites. And there were these long wait lists, and I applied for a bunch of them, and, I had no idea what was going to happen. Then a friend of mine told me about another rescue group that I hadn't heard of that was run by a friend of hers. And this woman moved me to the top of the list. And, friends in high places, right? And so within 3 days, my application was approved, all via Zoom. I had 2 interviews, a home inspection via FaceTime. And I looked on this website, and they had a whole bunch of dogs, a lot of them puppies. But this dog, Sadie, really caught my eye, this chocolate lab shepherd mix. And I was like, I want to go meet her. I want to go meet her. So we went to this horse farm in Middleburg, Virginia to meet her with the foster parents. But even then, this was a month after Inky passed. And the night before, I was a basket case. I couldn't stop crying. I'm going to start crying now. I couldn't stop crying. And I said to my husband, I don't know if we can do this. I think it's too soon. I feel guilty. And I had such a mix of emotions. And he said, it's okay. We're just going to go meet her. And my older son and his girlfriend were here from New York. So the 5 of us piled in the car. My husband put the crate in the back of my Jeep. And I said, what are you doing? We're just going to go meet her. And he's like, I know you. This is insurance.
Yeah.
He's a smart man.
Yeah.
He really is. I have to say, if I didn't have Bobo, I don't know what I would do. I mean, as awful as it was to lose Bailey, if I didn't have another dog in the house, I would have lost my mind, really. Like, just being able to have Bobo and his comfort. And he was grieving too. He was out of sorts for a long time.
Oh,
I'm
I'm
best
sure.
friends, right? Yeah. Now, Jen, tell us a little bit about Maggie and Riley. And I know you've lost a lot of dogs because you've done such great work with older dogs. But you did mention these beautiful dogs in the
Yeah,
chapter.
so I'm not going to be as good as Stacy. I'm definitely going to cry when we
That's
talk
okay.
about
I'm
this.
getting teared up. So it's
And like
so,
preview, if you guys read the audiobook, I read the audiobook and we got to that section. And so you'll also get to hear me cry in the audiobook because I'm like, do you want me to reread it? And he's like, no, we'll leave
no,
that in.
it's
So
real.
yeah, it is. So Maggie and Riley died a few months apart, and they are both dogs that I had like really special connections with. We've unfortunately had that happen, I think, 3 or 4 times where we've
Oh,
lost dogs, often within a week of each other. Because if we're taking hospice cases, right,
yeah,
it
that's
happens.
true.
But Maggie, let me talk about Riley first, because Riley, frankly, is one where I think we did it wrong, and Maggie,
Mm.
we kind of did it right. So Riley, oh God, I had such a great bond with that guy, and he was healthy when he came to us. His owner had died, and the family couldn't take him. So I was like, great, this dog is like 6 or 7. I'm going to have a long life with him. He's going to live to be 10, maybe 12, and he's healthy. And we went to get a tooth fixed. And when they did his blood work, it was messed up. And it turns out, it's a very long story, but basically he had kidney failure from Lyme disease that he had had previously. So get your
Oh,
dog's Lyme vaccinated.
yes.
So it's called Lyme nephritis. And kidney failure is a terrible way to lose a dog because it's a very long process and they eventually stop eating and they feel bad all the time. And I could tell we were getting close to the end. It was hard to get him to eat anything. I mean, we'd buy everything we could. And, for a while he would only eat banana bread. And so we were like making banana bread every day. But he kind of stopped eating, and he then was like not really wanting to get up and was super lethargic. You just tell looking at his face. And I remember it was like a Saturday morning. I was running a half marathon and my husband called and he's like, he's like all tensed up in his legs. And I was like, well, our vet closes at like noon. I'm not going to be done here. We won't be able to get him there in time. He'll probably be fine. And like, maybe we'll bring him in on Monday. And, uh, and it was not fine. It was too late. And we ended up waiting, I think, a day or two longer and then we, finally brought him in to the emergency vet in the middle of the night. Cause I was like, what the hell are we doing? Like it was time 3 days ago. Right. And I just like wasn't ready to do it. And it is one of my biggest regrets in my life that we waited 2 or 3 days longer than we should have. And he was just suffering on those days. Like there was no quality of life there for him, but I wasn't ready to say
Right.
goodbye. And he had to pay for that. And so when I talk to people, which I do a lot of people reach out when they're making this decision because it's so hard, it's so full of guilt, and you don't want to say goodbye. I'm like, listen, I did it wrong with Riley. Like I absolutely every week in the 5 or 6 years since then have had the thought of regret that I made him endure those 3 days. And like, I can be gentle with myself. I understand how he got there, but you don't
Yeah.
want to do that. Where
Right.
Maggie had she had this sort of condition where it said she wasn't really able to walk. And on one of her regular checks, they found out that she had a hemangiosarcoma, which I think is what Inky had. And, lots of dogs get these, and they're cancers where the dog will literally be fine on Monday and be dead by Friday. They just
So
grow really
sad.
fast and bleed internally. So she wasn't really showing a lot of signs, but we saw it on an ultrasound. So we knew that she didn't have a lot of time left. And, my husband and I had this talk like, okay, like, what's the threshold? I find it really helpful to like set a plan of like, this is when it's going to be time. And you can always change that plan, right? But
Sure.
it's helpful to have it. And so for us, it was, if she can't stand up anymore, or if she's up all night panting because she's uncomfortable. And she had that night where she was up all night panting. So she wasn't in a ton of pain, but she wasn't
Right.
okay. And we're like, this is going to be the day. And we're going to do a thing that if you have the opportunity, you should do, which is like a last best day. We made her waffles. I gave her ice cream, like a pint of ice cream out of the fridge.
Why not?
But our dog Hopper, who we lost in June, we bought her extra large Hershey bars. But we just had like the best day for her, and she was able to enjoy it because she was still okay. And
Right.
then put her down that day. Now she probably would have lived another week or two, and there would have been some good and some bad moments, but she wasn't able to sleep at night, so it wasn't great. And I
Right.
tell people like I would rather give up a couple weeks of mixed quality of life and have them have a really peaceful, gentle end where you can still enjoy that love than to make them suffer one day longer than they should have, which I did with Riley.
I hope that you forgive yourself because the majority of people that I've spoken with do that. And it's a lot more than 2 to 3 days, let me tell you. And it's hard
Yeah.
for me not to be like, what did you do? Or why did like months. I mean, it's so, and it's interesting what you said about Maggie, because with Bobo, I felt like we did it a week or two too early. And my husband said, it's better a little early. It's better a little early, and so we can beat ourselves up. And I really hope, Jen, that you forgive yourself because you're human. You love your dog.
Yeah.
It's hard. It's such a difficult thing. So I'm giving you lots of love and you deserve it.
Thank you. I mean, I feel like I'm, not that it made it worth it, right? But like
Right.
I'm honoring that thing that he gave to me by like sharing that story with other people and being
Yeah.
like, you can spare this because listen, you are going to feel guilty no matter what you do. Like
That's
it
the
has been the
problem.
right decision for every dog, and it doesn't matter if it was maybe a little early, if it was too late, if it was exactly the right day, which I've also been able to hit that mark once or twice. You feel guilty having to make that decision, and if you don't make the decision, you also feel guilty that you didn't do that. Right? There's no
Yeah.
way out of that guilt. But the ones that I feel better about are the ones where it's like, man, like we really had the chance to like deeply sit in our love at the very end and not be distracted by much else. And it's harder to do that if you wait too long.
That is true. Well, I want to mention in this chapter, you talk about the importance of having our feelings validated, online support groups, going to therapy, creating rituals. It's all so important. I have to say, again, this book is amazing. I mean, this is what's so fun. We talked about so much today, and yet we barely scratched the surface. So everybody has got to get this incredible book. Again, The Purest Bond, Understanding the Human-Canine Connection. Was there anything today, ladies, that I didn't mention that you were hoping that I would bring up, or any last words? And then, of course, you got to tell me how we can follow you both and find your book.
You hit all the big points for me. This is great.
Yeah, it was great. It was great. It was a really nice conversation, and you did a great job of asking questions and hitting the right points.
Oh, I'm so glad. All right. So, Stacy, how do we find you on social media?
I am at Colino Stacy on Twitter, or
Okay.
X, I guess, as it's now called.
I still call it Twitter.
Yeah. You can find me on LinkedIn. You can find me on Instagram at Stacy A. Colino. And I'm also on Facebook.
Great. And Jen?
You can go to any social media platform that exists, and we're there. The dogs are the golden ratio, and then the number 4, the golden ratio 4. And we tweet about the book there, and you can see lots of pictures of golden retrievers playing in the ocean, and it'll brighten your day.
Yes, absolutely. Now, do you have a website for the book?
Simon & Schuster has a
Simon
website,
Schuster.
so that's the publisher. It should, like, if you search for The Purest Bond, it should be the first link that comes up.
All right. Now it's available for pre-order right now?
Yes.
And when does it come out? November?
November 14th.
Yep. And that'll
I
be
said-
the audiobook and the hardcover, November 14th.
On November 14th. Well, this has been an honor. You two are fantastic, and I so enjoyed the book. I want everybody to go to Instagram and follow me at Lisa Davis MPH if you're so inclined. You want to see my beautiful Benji and Blue, and also Bailey and Bobo. I got pictures of them as well. Also, be sure to follow at Bully Girl Mag so you don't miss a thing. Go to www.bgmwarehouse.com. You can get my hat. They have an amazing sweatshirt. I just got the sweatshirt. Let me tell you something. I had my husband feel the inside. I was like, oh my God, it's so soft and warm and lovely. They have a bunch of great racerback stuff for runners and all kinds of great Bully Girl stuff. And then also you can get the Bully Girl app if you go to Google Play or on iTunes in the App Store. Just keep coming back, rate, review, subscribe, and tell your friends. Thanks so much for listening.